I wish I lived nearby and could come visit every weekend. A Bresson, I mean, the man escaped, condamné à mort. Yeah, I mean, Bresson for me is lyricism. He, is always teaching us how to do something with almost nothing. You know, gestures, hands, props. Oh, well, Tati, playtime in 70mm. I've seen it 3 times. Truffaut, Shoot the Piano Player. First, dum 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 dum.
Bonsoir, Charlie. Ça va bien?
The kind of noir meets playful meets fantastic. All of Truffaut is, of course, required viewing for any filmmaker who has any self-respect. Should I go around this way?
Yes.
Okay. I just watched this again recently. Spielberg's first movie. It was actually a TV movie in the States and released in theaters in Europe. But real poetry of the road. It's a great example of just how much dynamism and action and tension you can make out of just one man being hunted by a truck. The original Le Mans. I don't think the Steve McQueen movie is great. I think in a weird way, the drama is terrible. The action is beautiful, but I think they wrote the scenes on a napkin. Oh, The Conversation. What is it called in France? Conversation Secrète. This is a film that Coppola made between the 2 parts of The Godfather. Kind of an independent film. I was just talking to Harrison Ford, who I was spending time with in the States, about this movie. He has a small role in this movie. But a fantastic movie about many relevant themes today, about wiretaps, paranoia, feeling like the government or someone is listening at all times. But beautifully lyrical, and a great David Shire score. There was a big influence, actually, on the score for Logan. Milos was a teacher of mine. You have Taking Off. That's very hard to get in the U.S. on video. One of his very early films, and when he first came to the States.
So let's get a little sentimental. Let's start holding hands.
Everyone knows Amadeus. Fantastic film. I'm a big fan of Ragtime. Milos's, it's kind of also an influence, like on Le Mans 66, we have many stories all over. And Ragtime is based on a book that kind of makes history into fiction and is a really beautiful score by Randy Newman, his first score. I think still his most beautiful score. I also think Milos's version of this musical, Hair, is fantastic, kind of revolutionary in its style. He was a great teacher, very generous teacher at Columbia University in New York, and I was very thankful to work with him. He loved to teach. I've tried to take that from him. I try to teach whenever I can because it makes you appreciate, I love Coppola's Dracula. This is Sandy McKendrick, Le Grand Chantage. Great movie about corrupt journalists, columnists, kind of a noir, shot in 1959 in New York City. Elmer Bernstein wrote the score, but also there is a jazz component to the movie, and the Chico Hamilton Quintet actually performs in the movie as a jazz quintet and also some of the score. In fact, PTA, Paul Anderson, used some of the Chico Hamilton music for this in Boogie Nights. Michael Powell, Black Narcissus, loved this film and was a big influence for me on Girl Interrupted.
Where's Jamie? You don't know
Black Narcissus. This film was shot during the war and takes place in the Himalayas. It's almost like a fairy tale, but also a demonic fairy tale because the nuns in this Himalayan monastery are going insane. One of the things Powell said he did in that film, the climax of the film is kind of an incredible dance with music and images, and obviously the red shoes, you think of that, but he actually had his composer compose the climactic music for the movie before he shot it, and then he shot the climax of the movie to the music, almost like he was making an animated film or something. So they acted out all the scenes to the actual score. So it's an incredible kind of symphonic event. You keep your Blu-rays separate. That's interesting. Well, we should stop. I'm on Preston Sturges, one of the great writers. And if you haven't watched Preston Sturges's films, The Lady Eve.
Just a little further.
There. She can't make up her mind. She's up again. She recognizes you. She's coming over to speak to you. The suspense is killing me.
Sullivan's Travels. These are also films that are a huge influence on the Coen brothers. The kind of style of the patter.
Son, you got a panty on your head. You drive fast, eh?
Oh, here's Sandy McKendrick's section. This is another teacher of mine who made Sweet Smell of Success.
And here you are out in the open, where any hep person knows that this one is toting that one around for you.
Oh, this is a great collection. Sammy Going South, The Maggie, and Mandy, Crash of Silence. Very hard to get these in the States. Mandy is the story of a family that suddenly realizes their daughter is deaf.
Go on.
Well, John Ford is the most famous director of Westerns, and in a way, we must all pay tribute to him.
You're the notorious Ringo Kid.
My friends just call me Ringo.
Oh, George Stevens, yes. I mean, that is, to me, a kind of one of the great Westerns. Also kind of historic in the sense that it wasn't all machismo. The Van Heflin plays kind of a family man trying to make his way. Obviously, also, it was a huge influence for me on Logan as I came up with the story for Logan, because the idea of Wolverine as a kind of outlaw or gunman who has tried to put his guns away and is drawn back in one more time. Also, the component consistent between Shane and Logan is in Shane there is this relationship between Alan Ladd and this child. And in, of course, Logan there is the same.
Is it true that for Logan you showed to the Fox Little Miss Sunshine?
Yes, well, it's getting easier to imagine because more films are doing it, but at the time when I was proposing Logan to them, I wanted them to imagine that you could make a different kind of superhero movie. I don't really believe there is a genre comic book movie. You can make a noir comic book movie, you can make a heroic comic book movie, you can make comedic comic book movie, you know. Comic book isn't a direction. That's like saying I'm making a novel movie, you know. It just says what the story came from. It doesn't tell you the form. And in fact, I think that's the problem with for me, with a lot of comic book movies, is that they don't have an identity. They're just about the costumes and the gear. That's the reason Chris's movies stand out so much, is that they're really beautiful noir films.
I stick a razor in my mouth and do this.
I haven't seen Joker, but obviously that sounds like a departure.
And maybe tomorrow.
When I met Johnny Cash writing the script for Walk the Line, the biggest thing John Cash was worried about, is he was like, don't let these actors hold a guitar like it's a baby. So he would go, John Cash grabbed his guitar by the neck and stay there, and he like walked away with it dragging behind him, you know, because for him, he said, you know, a guitar is a tool to a musician. To people who idolize musicians, a guitar is like, oh my God, I'm holding Johnny Cash's guitar. But to Johnny Cash, it's just like holding a plunger or a toilet bowl brush or a broom. You know, it's just what he makes music with. So I shared that story with Joaquin, and he tried to live with a guitar.
I got studs.
Brilliant actor, Joaquin, one of the great instinctual actors I've ever come across. It's like his system will shut down if he doesn't feel the scene is true. When we were talking about Westerns, we have to talk about Sergio Leone. I mean, there's kind of two great movements in Westerns, the classic Hollywood period, and then the Italians essentially stole the genre, and it was a kind of magnificent amplification, kind of a stylization of the American form, making it their own. Almost every film fan knows most of the great Leone Westerns, and other spaghetti Westerns made by compatriots of Leone.
Oh, you cannot spend your life regretting.
And then in an interesting way, in the 70s, I would say led by Eastwood, the Western almost came back to America. And Eastwood, who was raised acting in many of the early Leone films, kind of almost led the way directing some of the great Westerns of the late 20th century.
I'm here to kill you, Little Bill.
Well, I am a huge fan of Christian Bale. He's in Le Mans 66. Also in my older Western, 310 to Yuma.
You make this?
Interesting, speaking of Joaquin, Christian is one of the other great instinctual actors I've worked with. He does a tremendous amount of research and is interested in such a wide variety of roles. Like, I could not tell you what attracted him to playing Dick Cheney.
I believe we can make this work.
One of the things I was most glad about making Le Mans 66 with him was that when you know him, as I have now for over 20 years, he is one of the warmest, most full of life, generous people, playful. And most people who know him in movies know him as dark, brooding characters. So in Le Mans 66, he gets to play someone, I think, more like him.
Look at this now!
Christian is not really interested in being a movie star. He's not really interested in publicity. He just loves acting. And it's similar to Joaquin. They just love becoming someone else. And whenever you work with them, you feel like you are honored, you know, because the kind of talent is like a fountain coming out of the earth. You know, it's something inexplicable.
Nothing in there about my trunk and your lovely little portmanteau.
Ozu. Not much. You need to improve your Ozu collection. Well, this is Tokyo Story, as we call it in English, but it's probably his most famous film. This is the first time he made it. There are two floating weeds. He made it twice, like Hitchcock with The Man Who Knew Too Much. He made a Technicolor one as well. Floating Weeds is a story of a traveling theater troupe in Japan who kind of, at the moment that they fall apart while they're on tour, doing a kind of traveling kabuki show. And there's some of the most beautiful staging. It had a huge effect, obviously, on the way I shot Wolverine. Teshigahara. This is a really abstract, almost interesting, almost surreal film. It's basically about a man who gets lost in some kind of strange dune area, falls into a pit, and there is a woman living in a hut who kind of takes him prisoner. I think is Teshigahara's way of trying to examine relations between men and women and relationships, and in this kind of strange, almost hostage setting between a man and a woman. For me, I think the one area for almost all filmmakers that you can always learn more is foreign cinema, Asian cinema. Just saw Bong Joon-ho in Toronto. He told me he had seen my first film, Heavy, many times when he was a young filmmaker in Korea, and that was thrilling to me because I didn't think anyone saw my first film.
Breakfast, it's the most important meal.
I'm fat.
This was my first movie, made for $250,000, and it would never have been seen if not for the French, for the Cannes Film Festival. It premiered at Sundance. I got a directing prize or something, but we didn't win distribution. We came out of Sundance with great reviews, but no one wanted to distribute a movie about a lonely fat guy. But I got a call when I came back to New York from one of the curators of the Cannes Film Festival, and they said, "Would you like to come to Cannes?" And I was like, okay. And I was broke. No, I didn't know how to sell my movie. I could hardly pay my rent. And I came to Cannes and the movie showed. And that's how we got distribution all through the world and ultimately even in America. And the film got seen on a screen. So thank you, Cannes.